come in, we can set up some more chairs. There's still a few empty up in the back. Let me start off by saying that, as some of you know, I am technologically incompetent. I could not possibly do these sorts of things without the aid of Max Vildaca up there, who is the archivist here, who sets these things all up, and particularly the technical stuff here, Bruce Cordes. He has been helping me for years in doing this. Secondly, we in the archives, these are all done archive dives, and I try to impress upon you that every one of them is based upon material which is in here, a huge amount of material in our archives. We have literally thousands of photographs of people in Westfield over almost the last 200 years, certainly from the 1860s. They exist in all kinds of formats. Unfortunately, some of the things we wished we had photographs of, we don't. It's sort of the accidents of photographs. It wasn't people professionally going around and taking snaps. It's whatever the various family did and then whatever they gave to us. But we do have an enormous resource of images of Westfield. Now, because of that, I wanted to make a small group of them visible. So I decided to concentrate just on Elm Street, from the green to the river, short stretch of the city. And I decided also, because we've got literally hundreds of photographs of that, and you couldn't possibly sit through that, that I would take specific spots and show you the change. Because one of the things that I have learned in 60 plus years of working with history is that things change. Whether we like them or not, whether they're good or not, things change. And you're going to see many of those changes here. Now, the first few shots I'm going to do are to give orientation to those of you who have been in town 50 years or more. I came to town about 60 years ago, and consequently, I've got a visualization of what the town looked like at that point in time. So there's just a few orientation shots so you can understand what it is we're talking about. Now let's see how this works. It does. Obviously this first one, we're looking south on Elm Street, and I've got a magic pointer here so I can do the same thing to orient you to everything. Right here is Church Street. This building used to be the Opera House. Here's where the bank was. This is the old Methodist Church. And right here is where the M&T Bank is today. Westfield Cooperative Bank was there. The reason I chose this picture is that from 1875 until 1967, downtown, the center of downtown, was dominated by the three great big churches. And the biggest of them all was the Methodist Church. And you can see just how dominant this image is of downtown. The other two, of course, was the First Congregational, which is still there, and the Second Congregational, which in the early 60s moved up Western Avenue. And the removal of those three big giant structures downtown changes the nature of downtown. Here is another scene. This is late 1950s. It's a parade on Elm Street, and I've included this just for one particular reason. and that's this. Downtown Westfield had no stoplights until the early 1960s, where traffic was the most dangerous, and this of course is just where Main and Elm and School come together. There was a traffic box, and an officer would stand in there, and if cars built up, he could go out and direct traffic. This box was removed in 1961. I take it back, there was one traffic light on Elm Street, and that was at the head of Arnold Street. Come on in, Myrna, there's some seats up front. There was one traffic light, it was right at the head of Arnold because that's where the fire station was. And so there was a traffic light hanging in Elm Street there because you could stop traffic if the fire trucks had to come out. Again, I'm showing this simply because here we are at the edge of the green, beginning of Broad Street, the end of our Elm Street stretch. Notice, no traffic lights once again. And of course, there is the other dominant building at that end of town. Originally the high school. In 1932, the high school moves to Smith Avenue. It becomes, not the middle school of course, becomes the intermediate school, which some of you will remember. And it remained the intermediate school until 1961-62, when they built the new school on Silver Street. And a more recent shot, just to remind us, this is a rather desolate looking view of Elm Street. Of course, there is the hole that used to be Newberry's. And of course, all of this is now gone, and we have a spaceship in its place. And on the other side of the green, just to remind you, here again is a late 1950s shot, because the First Congregational Church does not have the top of its steeple built, and that was built in 1962, I believe. But there is a business that everyone who's been in town any time should remember, Ed Kravitsky's Elm Sporting Goods. And of course, in the 1980s, this is all gone, and we have a bank and an entrance to a parking lot. All right, let's start 1900. We're at the green, the library's right here. We're looking up Elm Street. This building, and it remains today in a modified form, this is the bank, of course. It is M&T Bank right now. For much of its history, it was a drugstore. And at this point in time, it is Henry Holland's Drugs. Next to it is the Park Square Hotel, which under various names and various structures goes back to the stage coach days. This burned down December 7th, 1942, and left a big hole in the ground. Here's a building that again had all kinds of businesses in. Over the last 50 years, it's generally been restaurants of one kind or another. There's School Street right there. There's the Methodist Church. Built in 1840, lasted here until 1875, when they moved over onto Court Street. There is the Opera House. The rear end of it, some of you will remember as the Strand Theater. And there is the building that is going to dominate the street. The Parks Block, it was known then, later years, the Professional Block. Another view of this end of town, here of course is the library. before all the construction that built the Great Hall and the rest of it. This is about 1923. In 1927, there will be construction that will completely change this building, and this, of course, is the Boys and Girls Library. This is the house that got added onto. These are the kitchens. They were knocked down. Here we are back at the Methodist Church. Probably about 1910. This is School Street. Now, look at these buildings right here. See, these are 3- and 4-story buildings. The original shopping street in Westfield in the 19th century was School Street, not Elm Street. Elm Street was residential and manufacturing. If you wanted to go to a store, you went to Elm Street and School Street. School Street was lined with these multi-story buildings. The church here, this is the church. And by the way, churches quite common in the 19th century put commercial properties in their first story. That paid the costs of building the church. The Baptists did the same thing. At this point in time, this is the post office. So we know this is before 1911 because the federal post office was built in 1911. It always had commercial properties. After the war, and this is a shot in 1946, there was a number of moves to improve downtown Westfield. And one of the problems with that huge church here was this slanting roof, which dropped ice and snow on all of the pedestrians on School Street who were going shopping. In addition, town got a serious building inspector at that point in time, and he began to look at some of these 3- and 4-story buildings on School Street, most of which had been built in the 1820s and 30s. And essentially, he said, many of these buildings are ready to fall down. You've got to do something. So they started repairs on one of the buildings, and it collapsed and killed someone. Then they got serious, and they went in and they tore a number of them down. That's where your parking lots on School Street came from. And they took the top stories off many of the others. And that's what they're doing right here. They're taking the top 2 stories off the old Methodist church, leaving us with the building that we have there today. Another thing to look at is, this is a barn. This is a timber barn frame construction. These timbers came from Vermont, and they floated down the Connecticut River, and then we are told by the people who built this that the timbers came down the canal from Northampton into Westfield. And these timbers are Vermont timbers. All right, back to a city. Arnold Street is right over here. We're looking up towards the bridge. You're looking at a city. This is, again, 1920s, multi-story buildings, commercial properties, vibrant all along the line. This, of course, is Parks Block. And this is why everybody talks about the professional building. It is 5 stories. It dominates downtown. It, however, has a bad history. The money that built it came probably from commercial fraud. It's one of the great financial scandals of Westfield history. It was prone to fires, mysterious fires. A lot of them in the early years are ascribed to disgruntled stockholders who lost their money because the man who built it spent the last years of his life with bodyguards and fear of people going to kill him. He never turned off the lights in his house because he was afraid of assassins. Anyway, mysterious fires of all the times. It was the commercial property in Westfield. There were always stores on the bottom. You can see here we have McClellan's and Woolworths. They were both 5 and dimes. For those of you of a younger set in town, let me tell you that once upon a time, shopping was dominated by 3 stores: Woolworths, Grant's, and Newberry's. Everybody knew them. Every town had them. Well, before that, there were things like McClellan's and Landau's. Then, this story and part of the 3rd story were offices, doctors, lawyers, all kinds of offices, including Christian Science reading rooms, the selective service offices, all kinds of offices. Then partially in the 3rd floor and all of the 4th floor were single room residencies. Now, before we had senior housing, seniors still needed a place to go. And so they quite often rented these single room occupancy places in the upper floors of buildings. And this one in particular was famous for that. And then the crazy thing, and I've told some of you, you've heard me say this before, the crazy thing is this top story. That was a bowling alley and a dance studio. Now, I can't imagine a bowling alley over those apartments, but there it was. However, in January 1952, it caught fire. It is the greatest loss of life of any natural disaster in Westfield. I think 8 people died in this fire. We've got all kinds of photographs of the fire, rescues. Westfield had no fire equipment that could reach these upper stories. What they did is they ran ladders from the buildings on each side up into it, and there we've got photographs of people crawling down the ladders. It was one of the great disasters in Westfield. And this is what it looked thereafter. The loss of this building changed downtown Westfield because all those doctors and lawyers and dentists and everybody else who had offices in there, that meant if you wanted to see them, you came downtown. And you parked your car and you went to see them, and maybe you had lunch, and maybe you shopped, and maybe you did something else. Well, they had to get an office fast. And so the town changed its zoning laws. And what it did is it allowed the doctors and dentists and lawyers and the rest of them to own a property somewhere else, in this case, houses on Broad Street and Silver Street and places like that, declare them commercial property and put their offices in there. That changed downtown housing on those streets, and it meant that people did not collect downtown anymore. Plus, the end result was, oh, I should tell about this one. The building next to it, this is Arnold Street right here. The building next to it was called the Gowdy Block. Now, originally there had been another building here. It was called the Masonic Building, and it burned in 1896. The Masonic Hall had offices in the top floor, and for some reason, whatever the Masons do, they set fires. The building had a couple of fires, and finally one that destroyed the building. The Masons left for other properties. I'll get to that in a minute. This block was built in its place. Now, the first story was a commercial property, a dry goods store of Darwin Gillett. He decided he couldn't wait for that, and he went across the street and built this building. This is Westfield Gas and Electric today. And if you look at the top of the building, you will see D.L. Gillett. 1902, I think it is, or 1901 at the top. So that became his commercial property. Those of you who remember the stories about Lewis Allen and the pure food movement in town, that's where his labs were in the top story of this building. When the Parks block burned, right there, that massive fire destroyed the top floor here. They did not tear the building down. They leveled it off and repaired it. Some of you may recognize this building. Brundage's, Kittredge Jewelers, there's Arnold Street. All that is the Gowdy block with the top stories burned off it. You want to come on in, folks? There are a few more chairs up here.
Three up there, Bob.
There's some up in back and there's some up here if you want to come in and sit. We've got a long way to go, so you may not want to stop. Let me get the... Now, you saw that Landau's was burned out. So Landau's moved. And this is what replaced, and you remember that original scene I showed you, they're multi-storied buildings. Well, the multi-story buildings are all gone, and we now build these quick, low, one-story buildings. By the way, there's Grant's, which was another one of those discount stores. Now, Landau's was here about 10 years. It was gone when I came to town in the mid-60s, and it was replaced by J.J. Newberry's, which survived until the fire of 1985, which left us with the hole in the ground, which today has been replaced, I guess, with a park and parking lot, and ultimately the space station. All right, let's go back historically, move to another section of town. We are at Franklin Street, right here, looking back into the center of town. There's the professional building down there. And these buildings, right up to, I guess, right about in here, still survive today. These buildings are still here. Obviously, there's new construction. Here, these are just wooden shacks on the corner. Now, I like this corner because there's so much change on this corner. This is, again, roughly the same era. And here I want to point out this elm tree right in the center of Franklin Street. That tree remained there until the early 1930s. You can tell how light traffic was in Westfield and how tractor trailers going through town did not really exist because this tree sits right in the middle of Franklin Street. Now you can't quite see it, but there's a water fountain right there in front of it. And there's a little diner. Now this diner originally was on wheels, and they used to pull it out and take it to the center of the park. And it was a horse-drawn cart, diner cart, hot dog cart probably, that serviced any events in town. They moved it here to the corner and parked it. It is one of the town's first diners, true diners. Now, if you go just up the, look further north, just before we get to the railroad overpass, now the bike path overpass, you have this big building, Gladwin Lane. Now, this originally was a wig factory. I assume many of you remember it. You may remember that behind it was Westfield Feed. This building survived up until fairly recent times, and in 2002 it's replaced with the courthouse. But again, it opens up what had been a street of multi-story urban developments into a much different look and use of the town. Back to the corner again, because we got a lot of good shots of this corner. Here is a shot from the 50s, and the tree is gone. The diner is gone. We've got a gas station, and there will be gas stations on this corner for decades. There's the Gladwin and Lane building right there. And when I came to town, this was one of the more infamous dive bars, the Old Rose Cafe. It may have memories fonder or not of some of you. Same corner, 30 years later, it's a Pride station now. Old Rose Cafe is gone, and one of the more famous downtown restaurants, Davio's, which I'm sure many of you remember, and many had enjoyable meals with the Alexopoulos family there. You may remember these folks too. There's Adam Liptak, Charlie Medeiros, Dave Banish, Barbara Swords, Lenny Burlingame, Barbara Russell, Gary Lynch, and I think that's Rick Sullivan right behind there. So, Westfield City Council. All right, back to the history. You can see we're going to go across the street. Here's the Baptist Church. Next to it, this had been one of the private houses. Remember I told you that in the 19th century at least, Elm Street was mostly private houses. This was a private house. It then became, quote, a gentleman's club. Now, I'm not quite sure what that means, but the Baptists were not happy about it. And so one of the wealthier members of the Baptist church bought it and gave it to the Baptists for a community center. Next to it is the Central Hotel. More on that later. And this tower and everything from here to the bridge, that's industrial. It's called the Tower Building or the Power Building because it's powered by water power from the town brook, which runs out of Pine Hill Cemetery, across Smith Avenue, through Grandmother's Garden, crosses behind the buildings on Elm Street, and crossed right here and joined up with the canal on East Bartlett Street. And it provided water power for this complex in its early years. This was originally numerous whip companies, and then there were metal fabricating. There were all kinds of companies that got into that complex. Here's a better look at them. As you can see, it's industrial right down the line. Now again, for those of you who are talking about restoring downtown Westfield, one of the reasons you couldn't, I don't think you can, is because of those changing in zoning laws and the movement of offices that I talked about. Well, here's another one. In this era, and that's the 20s and 30s, and to some extent the 40s, downtown Westfield had industrial manufacturing. It had this huge complex, hundreds of employees. It had H.B. Smith right in the center of downtown. It had Warren Thread Works just at the southern end of Broad Street. You've got all of those industrial workers now coming downtown, and many of them lived within walking distance. It's a different world. Here's one of the last remnants of that industrial. I'm sure you will remember this as Robinson's Reminders. Now, this is a picture from its last days because there's a crane right there getting ready to knock it down. This was in the 1980s, and this was a very, very controversial event in Westfield over an extended period of time. Robinson Reminders was no longer there. The building was vacant. There was a developer who wanted to put apartments in there. Now, if you went in this driveway, there was an open courtyard in behind that wall. And the developer was going to put apartments here, and that courtyard would be the parking for the apartments. I do not know what the exact number is, but it was something like there was enough room there for 1.5 cars per apartment. And town zoning law said you have to provide like 2 parking places per apartment. So the town refused to allow the developer to develop it. So what happened? It became a parking lot for Westfield Savings Bank. Now, just to the left of that building, they knocked down another section of the industrial area. And in that open space, Westfield got its first chain fast food restaurant. This was the first. It was Drummer Boy. 22-cent hamburgers. It, however, had a problem with its grease. And it had grease fires on a regular basis. And finally, I think it only lasted about 3 years, it gave up. The fire department was there on a regular basis, and it was gone. So you've got a vacant spot. By the way, that's St. Mary's behind it that you can see up here. There we go. Here's another view of that industrial section as parts are going down. There's Robinson's Reminders. There's the Baptist Church steeple. Right here is where Drummer Boy was. You can see it's now been replaced by a gas station. This is Sinclair Gas. Today it's a mobile gas station in there. You can see that they're getting ready to knock the rest of it down. And of course I've included this because here is one of the better known businesses downtown of that era, M&M Sales. I assume a great many of you remember the Moritco family and M&M Sales. All of this is gone today with the exception of this building. The last I knew, there was a Chinese takeout place there trying to survive, and I don't know whether they did or not. This is the Swift Meat Company building. Built in the 1870s. I cannot tell you because I haven't done any investigation. We've got a picture that has the building there by itself with a big sign on it, Swift Meat Company. I don't know whether they butchered there or not, but I know that that is the last survivor of this whole industrial stretch. Back up the street a little bit. When I showed you the shot of this east side of the street, I showed you the Central Hotel. And here's a building that most people, a hotel downtown, we've talked about it under various developers at various times over the last 60 years I've been in town. Here's how it was downtown. This is Chapel Street. This hotel was owned by the Van Dusen family. The Van Dusens were whip manufacturers. They also owned in later years the Planet Company, which was on Arnold Street. It's the building that Stanley Home Products took over, and today are the Van Dusen Apartments on Arnold Street. But that was the Van Dusens. This building burned in 1932, and if you're of a slightly cynical mind, remember in the depths of the Depression, they owned one other big hotel. That was the Van Dusen Inn on Court Street, where the senior housing is today, the senior housing, and that burned in 1936 with the second largest life and property in Westville. I think 7 people died in that one. So the Van Dusens were not lucky in their properties. Now, across the street on the other side of Chapel Street, this is Chapel right here, this was the Universalist Unitarian Church. The Unitarians were never very prominent in town. They didn't have a very large congregation. And by the end of the 19th century, they decided to call it quits. So they sold their church to the Masons. And the Masons bought it, raised it, put a brick bottom in it for commercial properties, once again, to pay the costs of the building. And this was the Masonic headquarters from 1909 to 1962, I believe, when they moved to Broad Street. It today is the Westfield Bank. Here's another later image. Right there is where the Central Hotel was. You can see it's been replaced by a gas station on the corner. And keep this in mind. There's the Robinson Reminder Building. Oh, there's the Robinson Reminder Building right there. Here's a view that should be more familiar to everyone. What has happened is that the Baptist Church, first of all, tore down the community center and expanded, and then bought the gas station property and expanded there too, right to the edge of Thomas Street. There is the last elm on Elm Street. In the 1890s, Westfield developed some late summer activity called the Taste of Westfield. It was a downtown food fest, entertainment fest. They blocked off Elm Street, and there were various booths up and down the street. In 1996, Friendly's had a booth right there. And a major thunderstorm came up and knocked that elm tree down and killed the manager of Friendly's. Today, on that corner, there is a park bench and a plaque. And my guess is that almost nobody knows why it's there and what it's there for. But that is the last elm on Elm Street. We'll look a little further up the street. Looking north, again, there's the bridge, the river. Orange Street is right there. We're standing on the railroad overpass. That's where this photograph is taken from. The Rialto Theater. Westfield used to have 3 theaters. The Park was the big, expensive, glorious one. The Strand on School Street was the dump. And this one was successful for a while, but it didn't last. This building right here, that's the Tivoli Hotel. That's another hotel that was downtown. Now, in the days without motels, in the days of train traffic, all your traveling salesmen, all that kind of thing, you've got to have a place to stay when you come from town to town. So it's common to have small hotels downtown. That is common. So Westfield had a number of them. This is the Tivoli. This building survives. When I came to town in the mid-60s, it was the fabric barn. The last business that I knew in there was Joey's beef jerky building. So I don't know what's in there right now, but the building survives. And this is the Rialto. As you can see, there's obviously a kids' matinee going on a Saturday matinee, which is what kids did up through the, well, my kids did in the 60s and early 70s too. They went to the Strand. It was a common thing to do. The Rialto bit the dust in the Depression. It simply could not survive. Today, the building survives. It is United Transmission. Directly across the street, on the corner of Orange, there's Orange right there, King's Supermarket was there for decades. This is probably, again, 60, 61, 62, something like that. When I came to town, this was the donut shop. It was a bakery, a donut shop. Very, very successful business, was there a number of years, but thereafter, numerous businesses have tried to make it on this corner, and nobody can. My guess is it's the essential problem with parking. It's the main flow of traffic through here. Nobody seems to be able to survive in this property anymore. One of the things we forget, right over here is Orange Street, is from Orange north to the bridge. There was a stream of small businesses in small old buildings. Now this is simply an example of one of the ones that was there. This was knocked down, and this is today Pasquale's parking lot. You go in, there's a gas station still in this corner, you go into Pasquale's right here. But there was a succession of them. The ones that you may remember best, the last survivors of this stream of businesses, Sue's Chinese restaurant. And just above that was Doc's Smoke Shop, which was very, very well known. I got my Sunday paper there for a long period of time. Those businesses are all gone. Westfield Whip and Novelty was in there. That building is still there. I don't know what's in that building today, but that building survives. Some catching up of some spots. This is Bartlett Street. St. Mary's is right down here. Gas station on the corner of Bartlett Street. There were a lot of little gas stations all over town. The big corporate chain gas stations were not what you did. When I came to town, this was Nightclub Soda and Ice House. And today, this is a parking lot for the barber shop over here. I'm not sure if there's any business in the building behind, but this was Nightclub Soda for many, many years. Now remember I told you that Elm Street in the 19th century was not these big commercial buildings. It was residential, small buildings, small factories. This is an example of some of the last surviving ones. This is Thomas Street. Lampson's Furniture, today Tribeca, is right there. And these are shacks for that purpose. I mean, they're not much more. This is a house, clearly. That may have been a house at one point in time. This is Neil Coal Company. And they're going to stay on Elm Street in various places on Elm. 1913, these are removed and Hearn's building is built there. For those of you more recent comers to town, Herm's was a major furniture store for decades. Top floors were offices for doctors and lawyers again. Herm's went out of business. They converted the upper floors to housing, apartments. And it's been a struggle of various people to try and make a business go on the first floor. Back to the green, simply looking at the east side of the green, there's Elm Supply, the Second Congregational Church, which really dominates that part of town. And I've included this shot simply because of this. That's a gas pump. I don't think, you know, we're again, say circa 1920 or so, and that's oil. That's how you got oil. This was a wheeled cart, and they came out, and if you needed oil in your car, you could pump it from that wheeled cart. But that is a gas pump. So obviously, when you're dealing with renewal of downtown, and there is a piece, there must have been a gas tank underneath that, an oil tank of some kind, and probably polluted ground in there that no one's ever noticed. We're back at the river. This is the Van Dusen Whip Factory. It sat on the riverbank roughly where Kane Park was, or roughly where the north-going bridge is today. It failed, as most of the whip industries did, as the automobile took over, and was empty for many years. It was powered by water power from the Westfield River. If you don't know, under the bridge there was a dam, and that dam funneled water to both sides of the dam, to both sides of the river, and it powered factories here and mills on the other side. Well, in the floods, 36, 38, the rush of water undercut this building, and the back end of it collapsed. And so in the mid-1930s or late 1930s, this building was knocked down. Eventually, in the 50s, they built Kane Park, and then eventually, 15, 18 years ago, they built another bridge there. Now, just a last shot, so I didn't do a good job covering much on the east side. This is another cursed building. This building right here, 1, 2, 3, 4 stories. Originally was Depping and Moore Hardware, then became Bryant Hardware, and it had numerous fires. With each fire, they took one floor off, and then it burned again, and they took another floor off. And then in 1976, this building caught fire. This was the coffee den run by the Kalfa family. Some of you who've been in town more years may remember the coffee den. There were 2 coffee shops that you went to in town. The Velis run coffee shop around the corner, and this one, I vaguely remember this when I came into town. It was kind of cafeteria style in there as I remember it. I was only in it a couple of times. But in 76, there was a major fire, and they ended up reducing this to a 1-story building, which became a discount house, building 451, remember that? What I most remember about building 451 is the last 8 or 10 years of that building, it became a derelict building, and sumac trees grew up from its inside up through the roof. It was just a disgrace for downtown Westfield. We've got a lovely parking lot there today. And there we have a quick walk around 100 years of Westfield, Elm Street. Any questions, comments? As I said, we have literally hundreds more views of all kinds of different buildings at all kinds of stages. So you can take any one of these spots on the street and do a history of that spot showing changes over time. Essentially, what you get from one end of this to the other, if you think back to that original picture that I showed you, if you stood at the green and looked north, you would have seen multi-storied brick and stone structures as far as you could see up to the river. It looked like a city. It was the center by the 1930s, 40s, and even into the early 50s. It was the center of shopping, the center of work, and in many ways the center of living, because there were apartments on all the upper stories. That changed. The biggest changes were fires. Essentially, it was fires in many of the buildings, which meant it no longer profitable to do the things that people have been doing downtown. The second thing, obviously, that happened to cities all over America was suburbanization, setting up shopping centers. The curse of downtown business was that the owners of many of the downtown businesses were getting old. Their children did not want the business. They had money. They invested their money in shopping centers in East Main Street. Those shopping centers were built to a large extent by businessmen and some doctors from downtown. They moved the business there. Well, it made sense. That wasn't unique to Westfield. It was going on all across the country. And suddenly, there was nothing downtown except holes. Oh, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Are there any comments or questions? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Building. And one of the characters was Charlie, the guy who operated the water-powered elevator.
Yeah, there was a water-powered elevator building. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, you know where the CVS is down there on Elm Street?
Yeah.
Wasn't there a supermarket called Cantel's Supermarket?
Yes, but a little further up the street. The gas station was on the corner. CVS is there now. And just a little bit further up Franklin Street, that was Cantel's. That was one of the well-known local grocery stores. Sure. Pardon?
Sweet shop on the corner of Elm Street. Where the gas is now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that.
That was a bus transportation.
Yes, that was the bus center. That was the bus center there. Yeah.
Well, my father sold bus tickets there, and then several of the business people in town, at the beginning of their travel, and that's, they said, well, hey, bus tickets on the train, plane tickets. So that's how we started.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
The gas station you showed on the corner of Hartman Street, that was also a Jenny station. A name that you don't hear much.
Oh.
Gas station, and always that building, when I was a kid, I used to look at that, it was so fixed on that building, because it looked like a cottage.
Yes, it did. It looked like a little cottage there,
And
yeah.
then in the late 60s, early 70s, the Russian family ran the Jenny station, the hand cycle.
Oh, okay. Yes.
When did the trolleys leave Westfield?
The last trolley, which was Westfield, West Springfield, Springfield, is about 1931, 32, somewhere right in there. What is forgotten in town is there was a brief period of time from, say 1900 to about 1920, when you could get on a trolley at the Green, ride north to Vermont, ride to Boston, ride to Pittsfield, or let's suppose you just want to be in Westfield. You could ride the trolley and go out Franklin Street, all the way out almost to the Armory. You could go out Union Street. You could go out Silver Street to Columbia Bikes. You could go up Silver Street to Mill Street. You could ride up Court Street to Mill and back around. There were trolley lines all over the city. If you're curious, we have the trolley maps up in the archives and the trolley schedules. You can look at them. That's how you got to work. You paid your 5 cents and rode the trolley. And that, for those people, there are trolley fanatics. There are those people who believe that the wiping out of trolleys in America was a plot by the Standard Oil Company and a couple of the automobile companies, because they were going around and buying up trolley lines, and that's clear. They bought them up, and they closed them, forcing people to go to buses and cars. And that's the attempt to reestablish mass transit lines. The few cities that have kept trolley lines or their equivalent, they're crowded, they're filled, people use them. Yeah. Well, yes, one last question.
Concerning the trolleys, when did they start? Were they horse-drawn originally?
The original trolley in town was a horse-drawn line from the depot to the Green. In about 1895, it was electrified. And then they began to expand everywhere. And those of you who heard my first talk in this series this year on Western Avenue, I talk about the Gillettes who buy up the line and run it out to their park out across from the college. And that's the beginnings of the expansion of the line. And that's the line that ultimately goes up to Huntington. It's called the Blueberry Line. And joins up there and goes on to Pittsfield and Albany. Yeah. Well, you've all tolerated for an hour. The series is open for this year. I thank you all for coming. And maybe we'll do it again another year.